The latest update from the lockdown files confirmed that Chris Whitty and the government knew early on that the virus is not as deadly as expected, but they continued with their authoritarian policies. Hello everybody, welcome to the channel that challenges the mainstream media and the political establishment, from the left-wing nutters to the globalist elite. Let's talk about the lockdown files. We took a one day break from all these leaked WhatsApp messages and everything else has been exposed about Matt Hancock and the whole of the government throughout the lockdown. It's been pretty surprising that these lockdown files and WhatsApp messages have not really been focusing too much on Boris Johnson, considering he was Prime Minister. You wonder what's going on behind the scenes and the Telegraph coverage of it. But conspiracy theories aside, let's talk about Chris Whitty. We got some new messages that have been leaked about what they were talking about early on when there were some discussions about the upcoming jabs. And Israeli scientists were working on a jab, and they said, I think we've come up with the idea. And then there was this conversation inside government between Chris Whitty and many other advisors and civil servants and government ministers. Let's go to some of these WhatsApp messages and see what they had to say. Okay. Dominic Cummings shared a Daily Mail article about Israeli scientists saying they are only weeks away from developing a new jab. And then he asked in the group chat, is this report credible? So in response to this, Patrick Vallance came out and said that, well, the short answer is no. They have a vaccine for one thing, which hasn't yet been shown to work, that they want to adapt for this thing and humans. They would need to go through safety testing and small-scale trials in people, and then a larger efficacy trials. So it may all work out, but it is not going to be ready in weeks. All of these approaches will take many months at the very and most optimistic best. Remember, we still don't even have a jab that we know works for Zika virus. Yet, despite lots of work over the years. So this was a conversation about the actual jab. So this was completely different. But then you had Chris Whitty responding in the same group chat saying there will be a lot of good vaccine candidates that enter early clinical trials in the next few months. The rate limiting steps are late clinical trials for safety and efficacy, and then manufacturing. So for a disease with a low, for the sake of the argument, 1% mortality, a jab has to be very safe. So the safety studies can't be shortcut. So important for the long run. They didn't really say this publicly, and they were completely rejecting any of the data that was suggesting that the mortality rate is very, very small. It was actually less than 1%. And I get it. There was a lot of fear inside the establishment at the time, and they wanted to be cautious. And they had Big Pharma on one side focusing on keep pushing their upcoming products, and then you had all the other scientists in government, so they shut down the whole debate. Any external scientists, they weren't really heard. They were censored completely. But at the same time, the issue I have is not really just governments and politicians across the Western world that did this. The issue was the toxic relationship between the mainstream media and the political establishment. The media are there to hold the power to account. The media are there, journalism, to scrutinize governance and politicians, and in general, with everything. But we didn't really have that. We didn't really have journalists asking these questions. That conversation that I showed you between Cummings, Vallance, and Whitty, basic questions. Ask those things. Find out if there is any urgency for a new jab, or find out if there is any idea about the mortality rate. They didn't even ask these questions. They were completely focusing on, so do you not think, Minister, that you should do more lockdowns? Do you not think we should do more restrictions? More this, more that, rather than asking, do you guys know what you're doing? Nobody did that. And that was the problem. And that's how the establishment got away with it. Because they could afford to be complacent or complicit at times. Because nobody was holding them to account. None of us were being heard. Independent and new media were not being heard. Journalists who had their own independent outlets, they were completely shut down. They were not invited to go to these press conferences. And you wonder why all this chaos is now happening years after the first lockdown. It's now been 3 years. And time flies, but again, time heals when it comes to exposure, when it comes to finding out more about those decision-making processes and everything else that happened. But I want to know about from you guys what you think in regards to what I've been saying the last few days. I've been talking about the lockdown files, and we've created a playlist, dedicated playlist on the channel called Lockdown Files, and you can find all the videos we've done on this issue. Question is, as I've been saying, it's good that we now know more about those conversations, but are we actually going to get any punishment, any consequences for certain people who've been involved, for certain decisions that they made? Do you think that some of them will be held to account? Or do you think that they're just going to get away with it and the only punishment they're going to get is some sort of knighthood or a peerage? Let me know in the comment section. I'm Mahyar Tousi, and we are the media.